Good morning, everyone. My name is Genevieve, and I'm here to teach you a little bit of Qigong. We have a very special video today because a friend of ours damaged their foot, and I realized I might have some Qigong ideas for that person. I think they might be helpful for everyone. So, quick story, back in August, right before my kids went back to school, I managed to step wrong on a rock, just like out for a hike, totally normal, and stepped on the rock wrong, and I actually felt my whole ankle sprain. And I've never had a sprain, so I didn't know what that was, but I was like, well, that was wrong. And so in the aftermath of that, I actually learned an acronym that is super useful, and apparently it's common parlance for people who have hurt themselves. It's called RICE, and RICE stands for rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So all I'm going to do today is talk through RICE, but from a Qigong point of view. So the R stands for rest. And when I heard about that, I was like, oh, yay, rest. I need rest. I always want to rest. I'm always running around and never resting, so I should rest. But another true statement about me is I get bored very easily. So when push came to shove and it was time to actually rest and stay off my ankle, I hated every minute of it. I felt trapped. It was really bad. So what I discovered about rest is that I can do something that I call imaginary exercise. So I'm sitting there, I'm feeling trapped, I'm not doing anything, it's awful. What I will try to remember to do is imaginary exercise. I activate my Janshen, maybe I swing my arms like I'm walking even though I'm sitting, and then I take, for example, an imaginary walk around the block. In my imagination, I find my key, I open the door, I go out, I lock the door, I go down the stairs, I start up the hill. This is when I discovered that I'm not as strong in observation as I think, because all of a sudden I'm like, is it a brown house or a blue house, or do they have a gate, or like, where does this dog belong? So it's really fun to try to imagine yourself doing some exercise. And if you have a different exercise practice like running or biking or swimming or anything, I believe you can try it in your imagination. And at least for me, it prevented me from going really cabin feverish during my period of recuperation. So that's my suggestion for rest. That brings us to I, which stands for ice. I had trouble learning how to use rest. I had no trouble with ice. I love ice. My wonderful spouse bought me this special ice pack that comes with Velcro so that you can put it around your injured area. So what I learned about ice is when you're putting like your towel over yourself so you don't get all wet and the ice doesn't damage your skin, just pretend you're like tucking in your injured part like just like a little baby. It's like, okay, little baby, you got hurt, but you're going to be okay. And then you sort of stroke the ice pack around the injured area. In my case, it was my ankle. And those little handles are so cool because you can just wear this. And then to bring some Qigong into it, I imagine using the fact that ice is actually a form of water, I imagine that the ice is melting. And as it's melting, it's kind of transforming into Qi, and that Qi is melting down into my injury. It worked for me if I visualized like snowflakes melting and turning into clear water, or maybe because the ice pack is blue, I imagined like the color blue just kind of melting into my injured area. And this was really interesting because I actually felt when I started the ice practice that the imagination involved actually helped soothe my pain as well as the ice physically doing the same. We can't know. There's no counterfactual for that. I can't do the ice without imagination and test it versus the ice with imagination, but my sensory perception was that it actually seemed to help. So that's my recommendation for ice. Next one, C, compression. Okay, compression. Most people, when they hear that, you guys, I think they think of an ace bandage. I hate ace bandages. I don't like the color, I don't like the smell, I don't like the feel. So I learned something during my sprain experience, which is that something like a DVT prevention sock, a compression sock, can actually be used instead of an ace bandage. I'm not a doctor, please talk to your specialist, but for me the compression sock actually was much more bearable than the ace bandage. You can also cut the socks up and just like make things that fit your actual injury. So This sock was cut up to become part of my tutorial costume for Halloween, but I can now also use this as a little ankle wrap if I need it. So check with your doctor about that one, whether it's okay to use socks rather than ace bandage. But once you have whatever your compression is on your joint, this is where my Qigong really came to the fore. Qigong contains 4 energies of a spiral or a circle and all other movement in your body. So just really quickly, one of them is Peng, expansion. One of them is Li, rotation. One of them is On, going down, and I'll talk more about that in another time. It's not really going down. It's more like the floor is coming up, but on. And then we have G, and G is the power of contraction. So when I was doing my compression time, I would put on my special sock, I would visualize my joint, and then I would visualize the energy G. And G would be contracting inside the joint. So my swollen, painful ankle is actually physically shrinking as I do the compression on it. And I'm using that energy G. And if it starts to feel like, what have I done? I've crushed it, then I just use Peng. I open back up, expansion, take a few deep breaths, and then compress it again using G. So cycling through some expansion and contraction really helped for me. So that's C, compression. And finally, E, elevation. Elevation literally means elevate that thing. So one thing I figured out for elevation was that making these like towers of books and bricks and whatnot to like get a high enough surface to elevate my leg, there was actually a good and a bad way to do it. The way that worked for me was I found books written by my favorite author, or one of my favorite authors, Laurie Colwin. I had like her collected works in the house represented by this stack. And so I made my elevation out of my favorite books. And then while I was sitting there, like bored out of my mind, elevating, I could sort of think about the books. I could think about her tone of voice. I could imagine her being like, oh, Genevieve, you got damaged, but we'll be okay. So I recommend that for elevation. Just to be fun, I also use this book called My Life with the Wave, which is not by Octavio Paz. That's the original short story it's based upon, which I also recommend. But this book is an illustrated version with a different ending. And My Life with the Wave is about like spending your life with a form of water. And so it was really handy for me with all this chi and water and ice, thinking about my life with the wave as part of my healing practice. And you can put it on the top of your stack of books. All right, and then when I elevated, so imagine my leg is here, I actually imagined bringing the chi into it again. I could get some chi movement inside the injury, and then I could start dragging it down through my leg into my like hip joint, hip flexor area. And from there is an opening mentally in Qigong. You can open up that hip and just let all of that pain and swelling and suffering pour down out of your hip into the ground. And so I did this in my imagination. I also did like use my hand occasionally just to like help stroke that stuff down. And the idea is that it was all dumping out of my hip. So that is how I recommend trying elevation. Please enjoy this experiment. This is all made up by me. As I said, not medically advised, except for the acronym RICE, I believe is generally considered good practice. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I can make another video to explain. All right, let's salute our masters and salute our classmates. Okay, feel better, everybody. See you soon.